You're listening to Connections Radio, the sound of business. I'm Louisa Wizzi Magnussen with Helena Nicklin on the business of alcohol alternatives. By trade, Helena Nicklin is an award-winning wine and spirits writer, broadcaster, consultant, drinks influencer, and judge for various international awards. With 22 years in the drinks industry, a stint at drama school, and the WSET Diploma under her belt, she has always specialised in communicating with consumers through TV and radio appearances, live events, written articles, and engaging video content. She writes regularly for various titles from the Daily Mail and The Sun to Luxury Lifestyle magazine. Her latest news is the launch of her podcast, Flock Hive, with her sister, where she covers alcohol alternatives as one of the topics. Helena joins me today to discuss the business of alcohol alternatives. Welcome, Helena, and thank you for joining me on Connections Radio today. Could you please start by outlining how you first got into the drinks industry?
Well, the short answer to that is languages, actually. So I was living in Rome, studying French and Italian and being really pretentious with it. So instead of going out clubbing, we drank a lot of wine. And actually, I found that doing that in Italy gave it a slightly different focus as it might have done in the UK, shall we say. And actually, I ended up paying a little bit more attention to it. And there was a beautiful wine bar there in Trastevere that talked about wine in a very different way, and that got me hooked. And so I came home and found a wine shop and asked for a job.
Fantastic. What a great start. And now you're dealing in alcohol alternatives. Can I ask you what made you transition into the alternatives market?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have been writing about alcohol, doing all sorts of things with wine, particularly for over 20 years now. But a lot of it's to do with my age. So I'm in my 40s, having that existential, I don't want to say crisis, I want to say more of a breakthrough about the second half of life. And what that has looked like for me and my family is just trying to do things a little bit differently, questioning certain life choices. And one for me certainly was, actually, there are so many more things in the world that I'm interested in. Plus, I'm drinking too much because it's just there. It keeps turning up in my house all the time. What can I have that will stop me drinking so much, that isn't just packed full of sugar? What is there out there that actually might make me feel something and that might actually do my body some good? And what I've loved is that very recently there seems to have been a real explosion in this area. It's a brand new genre of drink. And so I'm really getting into it.
So can alcohol alternatives actually mimic the effects of drinking alcohol in a harmless way?
Well, that's the thing. It's still very, very new, but there are definitely a couple of drinks now, a couple of different brands that are working with something called GABA technology, which basically it involves mimicking the effect of a neurotransmitter to help you get that kind of 2-drink chill factor, essentially. And yeah, there are a couple of beers that I've seen that are using that. There's a new drink entirely that's using that called Sentia. And that really does seem to at least take the edge off and get you over that hump of wanting to pull the cork on a bottle of wine. But there are other things as well, like nootropics and adaptogens that kind of build on those things to, yes, help you with the anxiety, but also have other benefits as well.
You think the UK as a whole society drinks too much alcohol?
Yes.
Short answer.
It's the short answer. But I must say, I think it's particularly my generation and above. And I think, in 40s plus, we grew up with that whole ladette culture and without smartphones with cameras on them. And so whatever happened stayed on the night out and wasn't plastered all over Instagram the next day. So, and it's definitely true that the younger generations are drinking less, but still as a country, it's way too much.
And why do you think that is? Why do we turn to alcohol?
Well, I think we traditionally are a population that's been quite
Hedonistic?
hedonistic, but also not very good at expressing our emotions, not very open. I did a podcast just yesterday about the Victorian language of flowers because we were so uptight in those days. We couldn't possibly say what we really thought. And alcohol, I think for Brits particularly, is a really useful tool for socializing and just for getting a barrier up in a big, overwhelming room full of lots of people, and just helps you be a bit more sociable. I think that's a huge reason why we drink so much.
I think that's a very valid point. Having moved within the alcoholic and now alcohol alternative markets, what have you learned about the way drinks are marketed to the population?
Oh, very good point. Well, I'm seeing a lot less overt alcohol advertising, which is great. I'm noticing that the functional drink space is really taking the lead from spirits, because I think spirits have always been much better at marketing than wine has, because they understand that actually there's a lot more to getting someone to buy something than just saying, well, this is really high quality, you just got to trust me. What's in the bottle doesn't matter what it looks like. Functional drinks they're bright, they're colorful, they've got really funky names. You can see that they're aimed at a slightly younger audience perhaps, and they're just doing it really well. That's
Mm.
yeah.
And is there space in the market for more alcohol alternative products? And do you think alcohol alternatives are kind of the future we should be looking to go towards? Like, should we be drinking less, essentially?
We definitely should be drinking less. I actually did a podcast on Flock Hive. It's episode 5 with Professor David Nutt, who is the expert in GABA technology. He's been studying it forever. He's in his 70s. He started studying at Cambridge University when he was there. And that's when he started playing with GABA. And it terrified me, quite frankly, that episode. And it basically said that women in my generation are literally killing themselves, and it's never been this bad, and that alcohol is going to be the top killer of women in their 40s in the next 2 years.
Happy thoughts then.
Yeah, really, really happy thoughts. And so, yes, I think it's become normalized, is what he said as well. We're seeing it in very lifestyle ways on TV, in ways that it wasn't really there before. Like these big American series, there's always a massive glass of wine in there, and it's like with every single meal that isn't breakfast, and it's just been completely normalized. That was Professor Nutt's point as well. But there are increasing amounts of this new genre of drinks on the market. I think there's room for a lot more of them. What I'm really enjoying is that when the alcohol alternatives scene started, it was really just non-alcoholic versions of booze, so like a non-alcoholic gin or a de-alcoholized wine. But what that meant was that you weren't really getting any of the pleasure, and they were using a lot of sugar and preservatives and other things to kind of give you that feeling of alcohol, because alcohol gives wine body, for example. And really, you might as well just have a glass of water. What's
Yeah.
different now with these new drinks is that quite often they're sugar free, they're often vegan, but they're not hugely calorific, and they're much more natural. Plus, they've got the other benefits in there. So not just things like GABA technology to chill you out, but plant extracts as well to do you good.
What about the CBD thing that's going on? Like, can drinks? Because there's some drinks that have got CBD oil in them now, aren't there? Am I right? Did I dream that? I'm sure I've seen these. I've seen these alcohol alternatives that claim they've got CBD, which claims to relax you. And is there any actual evidence behind that?
I mean, very good question. I'd say that CBD drinks were probably the very first functional alcohol alternative out there, and some are better than others. I think it's fair to say that you need quite a hefty whack of CBD in there for it to do anything. Plus, it's cumulative as well, so just having one isn't actually going to do very much. However, if it is something that you have in your fridge and you keep having the odd one every other day or so, then there is going to be that cumulative effect. And there is also, of course, the placebo effect, which I think with CBD drinks particularly, is quite useful. Yeah, CBD, it does work, but there's a lot more to it than stuff you can just pull off the shelf, really, is what I've done.
Yeah.
There's another episode that we did on cannabis, THC versus CBD, and actually it's just not as straightforward as you think. And the upshot of that was straight CBD in most drinks that we can pull off the shelf doesn't actually do very much.
It's not very active, is it? It's the THC that's the active chemical in that particular plant. And taking away the THC actually makes the CBD less effective as well, I've heard. I don't know if that's true, so don't quote me on that. So you've mentioned it a few times, so it's time to ask you to tell me about your new podcast, Flock and Hive. What format does it take, and why did you launch it?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, Flock and Hive, it's a podcast with its own e-magazine, and really it was created as an excuse for me in my second part of life to take a deep dive into something different every single week. I've always been interested in, but never had the time to ask. And I figured that if I was always interested in these things, then there would be other people out there as well. So yes, it's food and drink, but it's built on the ancient pillars of the art of living. So food and drink, travel and adventure, constantly learning is the big one generally anyway. But there's science, there's nature, and also there's spirituality. And I host it with my sister. We try and mix things up every week. So one week it might be about sensory science and how our senses interact and how we can hack them to stave off dementia. The next week it might be about GABA technology in drinks. The next week it's about something different, like the secret language of flowers. And I'm just loving that deep dive into something that makes me feel a lot more connected with the world and the weird and wonderful things about the world. And that's really what it's about. I want people to always know that they can dive in and just leave having learnt just a little something and have some takeaway information and sort of feel better and more connected for it.
You're listening to Connections Radio, The Sound of Business. I'm Louisa Wizzi Magnussen with Helena Nicklin on the business of alcohol alternatives. We're going to take a quick musical interlude before we get back to business. So just doing the break. Are you happy? And are you still recording?
I am still recording. Yes, I'm just checking. I am happy. I feel like I'm talking very quickly.
That's all right. I talk quite quickly myself, so it's fine. Okay, we'll go straight into the second half.
Okay.
You're listening to Connections Radio, The Sound of Business. I'm Louisa Wizzi Magnussen. This is the business of alcohol alternatives with Helena Nicklin. So what's your favourite alcohol alternative and why?
Very good question. I'm still experimenting, but I must say the one that I've been reaching for most recently is a beer that uses GABA technology, and it's called Impossibrew.
Impossible. I like that.
It's a good name, right?
Yeah.
But I really do feel like that tastes like proper beer. A lot of the de-alcoholized beers just taste really like cooked and
I
sweet
used
and
to think
gross.
I used to think like the basic I won't say the brand names, but some of them just taste like shreddies. They just taste like cereal. And they
Yeah,
don't do anything for you. And you get a headache. I find if I have more than two or three non-alcoholic, if you're at a party and you don't want to drink, so you have a few non-alcoholic beers, I can't drink more than three or I get a horrible hangover without the pleasure of being drunk first. Feels very annoying.
it might be the sugars in there as well.
Yeah, it might be the
They make
sugar crash. So what do you think of the craft beers that are now doing alcohol free? Are they better for you? Have they got less sugar? Or do you really need one of these alternatives that's got this like GABA technology? When you say GABA, I just can't think of anything but the music genre. So I'm like imagining this technology is like really pumping.
Yeah, brilliant, because it's actually the opposite of that, I suppose.
Yeah.
But good question. They've got a lot better, and actually, the ones that I've tasted that are good have been the more craft beers, like things like Nirvana Brewery, etc. Really, really, so much better. They don't have that sort of shredded wheat. I know that's such a good note.
Do you know what
Cereal.
I mean? It's like it
It's,
tastes like shreddies, like just
yeah.
shreddies. I don't want to drink shreddies, thank you. No.
No, no. I mean, they're getting much better at it. Yeah, but what I've really enjoyed is seeing those good craft beers combining other things like lion's mane and functional mushrooms. So you feel like it's actually quite a treat for your body while you're drinking it, which is unusual.
Well, that's a good point because you want a treat. We're talking about a psychological treat, really, aren't we? When we reach for a beer, we go to the pub at the end of the day after a busy day at work. We can't wait to have that first taste of a celebratory drink. So I think what's quite important with these alcohol alternatives is that it needs to be a celebration drink, doesn't it? To give you that same kick. And then if it's got this technology in it that will make you feel a bit more chilled as well. I mean, we're onto something here, aren't we? Because as you said earlier, we do drink too much, especially us Brits.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right. It's the beer o'clock thing or the wine o'clock thing, isn't it? About 5 o'clock. And I think that's why Seedlip, if I can talk about brands, did so well. That was the first kind of non-alcoholic gin, and it was expensive, but it had to be expensive and it had to look like gin because it had to look and feel like a treat. You
Yeah.
don't want to pour something out from an old milk bottle or from like a cordial bottle because it doesn't feel the same. I think you're absolutely right. It needs to have that premium quality to it, which is why the packaging is important and actually the
Yeah.
price point. Because if it is 70p for a can, you're not going to feel like it's that much of a treat. I know that's ridiculous,
I
but
really know what you mean, though. It's again, it's a psychological thing, isn't it? You think, well, that's going to be rubbish. What's that got in it? If it's too cheap, you kind of think that with any product or service. If somebody's too cheap, like I wouldn't hire somebody who was a third cheaper than somebody else I knew that did the same thing, because you think, no, you want like the middle ground. So it's, and when it comes to packaging and branding, they've got to make them attractive and look like a celebration. And also, I think you make a good point. The price point needs to be, it'd be nice if it's not as expensive as alcohol, because that you do feel a bit cheated when you buy a non-alcoholic drink, beer in a bar, and it's the same price as an alcoholic one. And you think, well, this is ridiculous. I might as well have got water. Because saving money by not buying alcohol is another incentive not to buy alcohol.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. There's a very fine line between feeling cheated and actually feeling like it's premium enough to be a treat. I bet you there are hours spent in boardrooms going, what's the exact price point it should be?
Yeah, where's the sweet spot?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So tell me more about Flock and Hive. How many episodes have you done so far, and who's been your favorite guest?
Oh gosh, am I allowed to pick favorites? Yeah, I guess I can. We've just finished series one, so that's 10 episodes in the bag. Absolutely love them. I think my favorite guest, as far as sort of really opening my mind goes, was psychic medium Jessica Lynn. So I spoke to this Australian lady, and she was just like a breath of fresh air. I think because both my sister and I are quite skeptical about these things, but we're open and we want to believe.
You want to
And
be
it just
convinced, yeah.
yeah, exactly. But it felt like a place that we could have a really honest conversation about these things, the kind of things you'd always want to ask, but you would worry about doing it normally face to face. But I felt like I was in a position to ask those questions. And she was brilliant. And it really opened my mind to it. And now I'd quite like to have another go, knowing what I know.
Are you gonna do that? Are you gonna re-interview guests on later series and catch up with them and stuff, or is it always going to be a new guest each week?
I mean, that's a good question. I can imagine that I will get people back, because what normally happens is by the end of the conversation, you're like, there is so much more that we could talk about. There are so many avenues we could go down. Let's take that for another episode. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's happened pretty much with everyone so far.
So you've got quite a long list of things you do in your career. What are you most passionate about when we look at your writing, your broadcasting, your consulting, your influencing, and being a judge for international awards? Where's your real passion?
That's very interesting to ask me that. I've been really trying to answer that question myself this year, particularly because I do too much. I think where I've come out is I love taking all this knowledge about booze that I have and wine. I'm a real geek about it, and translating it to normal people and seeing that aha moment. So I love running tastings and I love writing for consumer titles where I get to do that. And if I can include like a travel and a food and drink element to that as well, so I can put everything in context, I think that's my sweet spot. Plus, that also means that I get to travel and go on those press trips and have a reason for doing so, which is quite nice.
So
Yeah, but
really, it sounds like communicating your knowledge, your passions, what you pick up from other people and your guests. You really like digesting that and then chucking it out and seeing who you can talk to. That sounds nice.
yes, yeah, but like a translator of sorts. I like that.
What have you learned about alcohol and its effects on the body during your career?
Well, what I've learned about it has actually been quite recent, and a lot of that is the research into GABA and actually why we shouldn't be drinking. And since my podcast episode with Professor Nutt, over the years, I've just seen what it does to me and how it makes me feel. And what I've really noticed, that actually hangover is much less about having a headache and feeling sick, and it's about feeling so dreadfully anxious the whole time. And I
Mm.
know that's a big reason why younger people also don't drink. I think because somebody managed to coin the term anxiety, which hit the nail on the head with it. And it's that feeling that is so god awful the next day. You can handle puking, you can handle that. You know that you've been naughty, so you must be punished in a way. But yeah, that awful sense that you've done something or you've said something wrong or that you've really damaged your body, it's horrific. And that's relatively new in my drinking career.
Your drinking career. What will people think if they've just tuned in? No, it's interesting what you say. You sounds like you're very much talking about the mental health side of the effect of alcohol on our mental well-being, not just our physical well-being, because we all know it causes liver disease and we all know it's not good for our bodies. But I'm interested to go further into this idea of what it actually does to the mind, to the psyche, to our brains, to our levels of stress and anxiety and coping with the world. Do you think long-term drinking is going to create a build up of that effect, and you could potentially become quite unwell.
Yes, that is exactly it. I think, especially looking more into the GABA side of things, like the more you go down that hole, you realize that actually excessive drinking over a long period of time, it really inhibits the GABA receptors. Yeah, I am not an expert in the actual technical bit of all of this, but yes, the excessive drinking, what that does in the short term is it means that your anxiety is heightened. It means that you're on edge a lot more. And that if you go sober, that is reversible to an extent, but not completely. And if you really are caning it all the time, you're going to end up with some serious mental health problems, which are sort of known in the back of my mind somehow, but seeing it written down and having reasons for it now is making me consider it a lot more. And that's also why I want to cut down my own drinking. But also what I hadn't really considered is, moving into the second phase, 40s plus, perimenopause, menopause, etc. Drinking suddenly becomes really, really evil for your mental health. It turns out. I'm going to be talking to somebody in more detail about this soon on my own Flock and Hive. But yes, I feel like I want someone to tell me how bad it really is and give me the reasons so that will actually make me drink less, if you know what I mean.
Do you think more research needs to be done into the connection between alcohol and mental health?
I think a lot has been done. I think it needs to be talked about more. That's for sure. Yeah. And luckily it is. I'm seeing a lot more of it. And I know it's because I'm more interested in it, but it's definitely more obvious with experts over social media and in magazines, things like Stylist, things like the Handbook. I'm seeing a lot more people writing about that kind of thing.
I guess sorry.
I was going to say, I'm also hearing people talk about it amongst their peers, which I hadn't done until quite recently. Even at dinner parties, people are starting to moderate, I'm finding. They might bring their own functional beer or their own non-alcoholic drink and just crack it at the table and have no qualms about that, which is brilliant because I would never have had the guts to do that at someone's dinner party before.
Yeah, it's definitely getting more normal not to drink. I remember
yeah.
I had a dinner party a few months ago, but back before Christmas, and half of the guests didn't drink. It was actually really nice. And like everybody brought a bottle, and like hardly any of it got drunk, and we had a lovely time. You don't need alcohol to have a nice time. But one thing that has come to my mind is a lot of people with mental health issues, with mental illness, do turn to things like alcohol to make them feel better. Now, the danger of that is that's a very short-term solution, isn't it? And then if we're talking that you can have mental health issues from drinking too much, it's just going to escalate. So I think a good message is that, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do it, guys. Yeah, but that's the thing. It's easy to say, isn't it? But even if you don't feel like you have an official mental health problem, you know that if you've had a bit of a rough day, a glass of wine takes the edge off, but then you feel bad about it and feel slightly worse the next day and your sleep is impacted. And it's just a vicious circle, isn't it? We
It
know
is a
that
vicious
inherently.
circle. So how do we get out of it?
Well, good question. I think having the alternatives there is one good way. More education at a younger age is probably good as well. I don't remember ever being told about the dangers of alcohol at school. I had someone come in to talk about other drugs. Alcohol is a drug, but other drugs.
They're non-taxable ones.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, we were actually in sixth form before we were even all 18. We had a wine tasting at school, for example. It was a totally different message. Now I know that probably wouldn't happen these days quite like that, but I think there's more they could say about booze.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, Helena Nicklin, thank you for joining me on the Business of Alcohol Alternatives. Where can we follow you online, listen to your new podcast, and get in touch for more information?
I am on Instagram at Flock and Hive, and our website is flockandhive.com. And all the podcast links are on there, but you can find the podcast on all the usual platforms as well.
Fantastic. Flock and Hive. We'll be looking it up. And thank you very much for your time today. It's been lovely to meet you and great chat. Have a nice day.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'm just gonna...
It's actually better than